Hello, this is Jerome Powell's voicemail. He's busy puking his guts out in the bathroom after ODing on everything he could figure out to come up with. Leave a message and maybe he'll get back to you. Bye. Beep.
Hey, Jerome, this is the Donald. Listen, man, I told you to cut rates. How come the market's crashing anyway? What the fuck's wrong with you? $700 billion not enough. Got to make it $4 trillion, $5 trillion, $7 trillion. I know, $7 trillion. We're just going to spend our way out of this. Everything will be fine. Now do it now, damn you. Oh my God. Boy, Storks. Shit. Well, this has certainly been a history-making last week. Today is the third time ever in history that we have actually had a double lock limit on the downside. As far as I know, that has never happened before. We've had lock limits in the overnight futures before. Of course, we had some during the financial blow-up, and we had a lock limit during the time of the election when Donald was first announced to be the winner. As I sit here recording this, we are flirting around with indications around the 2460 area, and the lock occurred right at 2501. So another 40 handles down. So what? 220. Yeah, assuming that that's where it goes, and I mean, we'll know when it unlocks, and it will happen during this podcast's recording, I'm sure. So when it does, I will pause the recording for a moment and take a look and see what's going on. All right, let's talk politics first, and then we're going to talk coronavirus. Last night, you had a Democrat debate. I don't know if anybody paid any attention to it. Paid a little bit of attention to it. There's really no there with either of these guys, and it was fascinating to watch the debate go on where the coronavirus thing and all of this, everybody wants to dance around the history, okay? But we can't dance around the history. We have to take the history on in the face, because we are now finding out what the price is of the civil service system in this country, of leverage, excessive leverage, of people not being able to do anything other than live paycheck to paycheck, of two-parent homes where both have to work because we have ratcheted the cost of operating a household up to the point that you can't have a two-parent home where one parent goes and earns a living and the other one stays home and takes care of the kids. We can't do that anymore for the vast majority of people. I mean, unless you're in the top couple of percent of wage earners, and even then, in most places, it's not happening. How many single earner homes are left in this country? How many? Not many. It's everyone is screaming about, well, I can't have the kids home from school. You have de Blasio and everybody else is, well, we do this and these kids won't get any food. What? Wait, what? So now we've built a massive dependency network that is based upon no apple cart ever being upset. We've done it to the point that you now say you can't close schools without the government providing some kind of relief, not because there won't be any learning going on, not because people need to learn something in order to, that's supposedly why they go to school. But the primary reason that these kids have to go to school is so they can get a free lunch and a free breakfast. Are we willing to confront the insanity of this? Are we willing to even think about the insanity of this? Has anybody thought through how stupid that kind of thing, might be? Is anyone at all? It doesn't appear that way, does it? It doesn't appear that anybody actually cares. Are we talking about changing any of these things? Was there any conversation whatsoever last night in the debate about that? Because that is where this kind of conversation ought to be taking place. And the answer is no, there was none. Absolutely none. All right. You have an article up from Reuters in Florida Retirement Hub. More people are worried about the stock market collapse than coronavirus. Well, by the way, this is at the Villages. Okay, now think about this. The villages, I have long said, this thing gets into the villages, it's going to kill an unbelievable number of people. It's about 100,000, roughly 100,000, all retirees, everybody, 55 plus, because you have to be at least 55 in order to live there. Most of these people are in their upper 60s and 70s. And here we go. So, we've got all sorts of things going on here with regards to, the government and how people are looking at it. They appear to be completely unworried about catching this. And I don't know if that's intelligent or not, to tell you the truth. I really don't think so. I think the compromised immune systems and general state of health among the people in this country is an awful thing, and it's going to cause all sorts of problems. And so there's a real issue here that needs to be paid attention to. But let's talk about a couple of factors here that we're not talking about. We're not having any kind of conversation about this at all. All right, and this is a huge problem for our country on a forward-going basis. And that is that if we don't do something about this, everything is beautiful. So therefore, I'm going to lever up my life and I'm going to make absolutely certain that nothing will work and nothing will survive unless I have everything the way it was. We'd better stop that. Okay? We'd really better stop that. And now you have all sorts of other stuff going on here. You have people like Scott Adams, who just came out and said that privacy is a luxury right, and we might not be able to afford it. So now what we're going to do is we're going to actually advocate for using things like Clearview facial recognition, along with credit card data and everything else, to identify who is at some sort of mass event, and then we're going to send the cops over there and shoot you if you don't quarantine. Is that really what we're talking about? Are we really talking about that? Is that going to be tolerated, or are the guns going to come out? Because Scott, you little pig, sitting out in your little enclave with your millions of dollars, you really don't give a fuck. But you're one of the people that made an awful lot of money while the country, over the last 20, 30, 40 years, became as segregated and as intertwined around this idea that mommy and daddy both got to go to work and the kiddies have to go to school because the kiddies have to get free lunches, and there isn't any way for this to... Excuse me? And now you're going to tell people that they literally have to kill themselves. One way or another. Either you kill yourself with a virus or you kill yourself because you starve to death. But he's safe from this because it won't happen to him. He doesn't care. Oh, and by the way, how's his health? Is he one of those people that might actually get really sick and die? So therefore, he's very willing to lock up everybody else. I put an article up this morning about the Diamond Princess data, which is being completely ignored. But there are other pieces of data that have come out fairly recently, because we ran a couple of Petri dish experiments, and I don't know if we did that intentionally for that purpose or if we just did it because that's kind of how it worked out. Diamond Princess. Okay. The Diamond Princess shows a few things that are kind of interesting. Some very interesting pieces of information. We've always made an assumption when it comes to serious illnesses and viruses that if you get the virus, that you're going to get sick, and that sickness is going to be serious, and so it's going to be very obvious that you're sick. Okay, we have unlocked futures. I'm going to interrupt this for a second. We've unlocked the futures, and we're flirting with the next lock level. We haven't hit it, but there's basically zero liquidity in the stack right now, and I think it's a foregone conclusion that it's kind of likely we're gonna go there. We'll see, but it is trading, so we'll see what happens with that. The Dow's down more than 11%. S&P's down about 12%, and again, there's there's no way to track this in terms of what the market is doing, where the PIP is versus where the bid and offer is. I think it's extremely likely that here very shortly we're going to hit that next marker at 13 and halt again. So it's that's going to be interesting to see whether or not it stops there. It goes all the way 20, at which point we're done for the day. Anyway, all right. So we have the Diamond Princess. And the Diamond Princess gave us a very large amount of very useful information. All right. One of the most interesting pieces of information that came out of the Diamond Princess is that we had a large number of people who were positive but did not develop symptoms. Now, people will say, well, but some of them got off the boat and then they developed symptoms. That's true, and that's accounted for in the regression analysis in the article that I linked. It's a scholarly article. It has some complex math in it, so if you don't understand the complicated math, because, hey, a lot of people didn't go to college, they did, or they didn't take calculus in high school. But if you don't understand the math, here's the bottom line. It appears among that population, okay, now remember, Diamond Princess was full of old people because that's what cruise ships tend to be full of. So the Diamond Princess was full of very old people, and among the people on the Diamond Princess, somewhere between, depending on how that model ends up validating over time, somewhere between 20 and 40% of the individuals who got infected will never develop symptoms. They are and will remain asymptomatic. All right. Now, at this point, everybody who's going to develop them should have. But somewhere between 20 and 40%. And think about the implications of this, folks. What this says is that if you get the virus, there are a substantial percentage of the people, even among a heavily skewed older population, that never get a fever, they never get a cough, they never get anything that is identifiable as a virus symptom, but they're positive. This is extremely important for a number of reasons. One of them is that we don't yet know, but we have every reason to believe, that you get at least limited immunity from having the virus. You may get complete immunity. Now, there are some reports of people being infected twice, but there are two strains, or two serotypes going around. So the fact that you get infected twice doesn't mean you don't get immunity, because you could get the second one, okay? However, that you got the first one would make you immune to it. And secondly, this changes the attack rate, it changes the case fatality rate, and most importantly, rather rapidly, it also changes R naught. Why? Because R naught is the rate of people in each turn, in each exponential set, that get the disease. In other words, one person infects 3, 3 infects 9, 9 infects 27, etc. It's a geometric series. The fact that you have a geometric series, and if you know the infection time, which we do know all the way back to Wuhan. I was charting this at the time. I was telling you there is a 5 to 6 day geometric progression series time. Even though China was lying, we were able to pick that data out of there. That was later validated as being valid in other data sets. So we know that it's about 6 days. All right. And the interesting thing about the 6 days side of things is that this allows us to work backwards. In other words, if I have 100,000 people that are positive now, and I know they're positive, I can work that series backwards, and I can tell you when patient 0 happened. I don't necessarily know who it is, but I know when it happened. I also, now that we know that there are a lot of people who either have subclinical symptoms, in other words, they never go to the doctor, or they never get any symptoms at all, I can also tell you how many people are never going to get sick from this virus because they've already had it and they didn't get sick. And I ran that math for you the other day, specifically with regards to Ohio, where Ohio's public health officials say, well, there's 100 per thousand people, which they're doing as an extrapolation. They don't actually have 100,000 positive tests. But if we take that number as being accurate, then there are about 10,000 Ohioans that have had the virus, and therefore the denominator for any serious complications or death must not be those just people that have tested positive in a hospital. It has to include all those people who have to have gotten the disease and didn't get sick. If you don't include those people, you are lying to the public about the severity of this disease, about the percentage of people who will get ill, about the percentage of people who will die. Now remember, when you start talking about percentage of people who die, it's a percentage. If you're the one, you're still dead. Okay? It's very similar to many other things. People say, well, and random types of things. Well, it's extremely unlikely I'm going to get hit by lightning this afternoon when I go out to get my mail. Well, it's true. On the other hand, if I get hit by lightning, I'm still dead. Okay. If you're the one, it doesn't matter whether or not statistically it was likely or unlikely. But the point here is that when we start talking about public health decisions, this is extremely important. Very, very important. And the reason it's important is that you have to inform public health decisions, especially when you start using the power of the government that is going to destroy people economically. You must use all of the science, and you must use all of the information, not just the information that slants towards scaremongering and fear. Now, don't get me wrong, this disease is awful, and if you happen to be one of the people who is at high risk, as I have said since this started, your best and really only strategy is to do everything you can to delay getting it. Not because it'll stop you from getting it. You're almost certain not to have that happen. Anybody that's, again, people who are relying on vaccines, I know. We've now got Regeneron saying they're starting Folks, you need to understand that even if it works, which I'm not going to believe until we have some hard scientific data that does, even if it works, is it going to be 100%? Well, if it's not and you get it and you're at risk, you're still probably going to die. All right? The odds of, if you tell me that I've got odds of death of 13% or 15% or 10% if some event happens, I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that event doesn't happen, because those are shitty and unacceptable odds. And anybody who thinks they're not has rocks in their head. They're crazy odds. They're crazy on the unacceptably bad side. But what should we be doing in terms of public health? Well, let me tell you what we're seeing around the country right now, which is a huge problem. And it is all based upon this wokeness and this unwillingness to tell people the truth and to apply measures where they really ought to go. You see, it is true that every now and then there is the rare person who is perfectly healthy, is in their 20s or 30s or maybe their 40s, and gets it, has a bad outcome, and dies. But that happens to people every day. I related in previous podcasts of the guy I went to high school with, jock of jocks, absolutely nothing wrong with him that he knew about. He's walking in a coffee pot in the office, he fell over dead. Now, that wasn't a disease. It was an unknown congenital problem. He had no clue that there was an issue. But it killed him anyway. Dead is dead. Okay? However, you need to have perspective on it, because that outlying case is going to happen. But that outlying case is not a public health emergency. Any more than me getting hit by a car when I go out to get my mail this afternoon is a public health emergency. Any more than me being run over by a drunk driver is a public health. We don't close every bar in the fucking city because somebody gets hit by a drunk driver. What we do is we try to stop people from driving drunk. We strongly urge them not to do it, and if we catch them doing it, hopefully before they hit somebody, we throw them in jail, because it's an unacceptable risk. All right, so who has the unacceptable risk here? Granny, old people, people with serious comorbidities. What is a serious comorbidity? Well, it's a lot wider than you think it is. There's an awful lot of people walking around who claim, oh, yeah, I'm healthy in any size, and they can't put out 5 or 6 mets worth of metabolic output without being winded or worse. Well, that's a serious problem, folks, because you have a disease here that attacks the lungs, and therefore it can be expected that if you get a bad case of it, it's going to impact your ability to exchange oxygen. And if you run out of ability to exchange oxygen, all kinds of bad things happen. And then you have these people in the supposedly emergency room physicians saying, well, the actual thing that kills them tends to be cardiac. A lot of these people seem to turn the corner and then they crash. Well, yeah, because you did a lot of damage to their heart muscle during the time that they were sitting there with a vent down their throat. And by the way, can we stop this bullshit about we have to build thousands and thousands of more vents? By the way, we need another million vents, and we need them available right now. Look, folks, go look up the literature. I am not trying to scare people with this, but you need to go look up the literature. Ventilators are last-ditch things. All right? Leave aside viral things and stuff like this. If you get thrown on a vent just due to some ordinary kind of thing that happens, of course, I don't know if there's anything that you could call ordinary that causes you to end up on a vent. But assuming that you end up on a vent due to an accident or illness or whatever have you, the odds of you ever coming off of it being okay, only about 50-50. Well, this is without the virus being involved. And the 1-year survival is something like 34%, or something like that, about a third. Okay? Now, why is this? Because an awful lot of people that end up on vents in the first place end up on vents because their underlying condition is something like COPD or something like this. Okay? And that's how it happens. But the problem is this. If you think 11% risk of death is bad, how would you like 66% risk of death? Is the answer to build a lot of vents, or is the answer to not need them, to find ways to not need them? All right, so what do we know of that we could do on a public health perspective that would dramatically reduce the risk of people, especially old people, which is where most of the serious critical and death cases come from, to end up in a hospital on a vent in the first place? Well, the first thing we could do is we could tell people who are over the age of 65 or anybody who can't manage to climb 10 flights of stairs without being totally winded and wasted, lock your ass in your own house and nobody comes in or goes out. Well, what do you do when Granny is living in your place and you're not one of those people? Well, guess what? You get to lock in with her. I'm sorry. Oh, but I'm going to lose my job. Well, yes, you are going to lose your job. Probably. If you have to actually go to work to do your job, if you can't telework or whatever, yeah, you're going to lose your job. Well, my kids are, guess what? They're staying too. Well, I can't do that. Well, then you leave or Granny leaves to somewhere where she can. Well, I can't. That's hugely disruptive. You're right, it is for you. And think about what just happened in Ohio, Illinois, and California. How many millions of people, millions, folks, just lost their jobs forever? We're going to have a severe recession in the United States right now. Right now, folks. And we're going to end up with much worse than that if we don't cut this bullshit out. Would it be bad personally for you? Yeah, but what you're saying here is that so you don't have to do that. So that's not necessary for you. Everybody, 80% of the restaurants and bars in Illinois, Ohio, California are never going to open again. Their rent has to be paid, their fixed costs have to be paid, and their revenue just went to zero or close enough. Do you think DoorDash is going to keep them operating? Bullshit. Never mind that if you stay open to serve that set of customers, your entire kitchen operation has to remain functional, which means a huge part of your variable costs, staff, have to remain employed. Folks, this won't work. Okay? Isolate, contain, stay home. Yes, makes sense, especially if you are or around somebody at high risk. But we're not stopping there. We're doing it for people, including people who may be immune. And we're not developing a way for people to find out if they are. Why not? Second, from Korea, we have some mitigation strategies that appear to be effective. Now, they're not vaccines. They're not proof against infection. They don't work that way or that well. But there is a very cheap anti-malarial drug. It's been known for 50 years. It's off patent, which makes it very inexpensive. It's got a long list of contraindications in terms of drug interactions. And folks, this is why, people just say, well, I'm just going to go buy some of this and start guzzling. Don't do that. Okay? But we have some of these drugs There's a couple of them. This is one that it's out there. The Koreans used it. The South Koreans used it. Notice that the South Koreans had substantially different outcomes in terms of percentages of cases that progressed from, hey, this person showed up at the hospital, to serious critical and died. All right, very serious differences. Everyone says, oh, that's because they're younger. No, actually, maybe it's not. Now, think about this, folks. The Koreans had, so far as we can tell, had an overall fatality rate of about 0.5%. And yet, we're hearing numbers generally of 2, 3, 4%. What? That's a huge difference. That's enormous. Was some of this because they started playing around with chlorquinone? I think that's the way it's pronounced. Antimalarial. Don't know. There are no clinical trials, and there never will be during the next month or two because they take too long. But you know what? They were using it. It appears to work. So, why aren't we using it? Why isn't this something that we're, and by the way, this is something that people use as a prophylaxis. In other words, without being sick when they go into areas where malaria is common. All right, if you take a trip into an area where malaria is common, you will be advised to use some kind of anti-malarial. And you're advised actually to start it a week or two ahead of time. In case you have a bad reaction to it, you can try something else, all right? But this happens to be one that's very inexpensive, very easily and readily available, and it's all over the place. Why aren't we using this in an attempt to inoculate among people who are at high risk? If you could take, folks, if you could take a 10% death rate for the people that are at the highest risk of attack by this thing, like the folks at the Kirkland nursing home, and you could knock that down to 1 or 2%, all of a sudden this starts to look almost exactly the same as seasonal flu does for that population. And all of a sudden, all this emergency shit disappears. Is it still bad? Well, yeah, it's still bad. But you're taking a 0 off the rate of serious complications and death. Do we know we can get there? No, we don't. But why aren't we going there? Why isn't this the focus? Among the people, again, folks, among the people who are at the highest risk. If I was over 65 and had compromised cardiopulmonary function, in other words, I was worried about being infected by this thing and dying, I wouldn't think that this so-called distancing thing and closing every bar and restaurant and everything else was going to actually stop me from getting it. Might delay me from getting it, but it's not going to prevent me from getting it, especially if I got kids or parents in the house that are not doing these things. All right. I would be demanding this medication right now. Not because it's going to stop me from getting the disease. It probably won't. But it very well may keep me out of the hole. And if it takes a 0 off the risk of me going in the hole, by God, I'm going to insist that some son of a bitch write me a prescription. And I have to lie about saying I'm going to fucking Africa next week. I'm going to do it. I'm going to get my hands on that stuff by hook or by crook, and I'm going to use it. Why aren't we doing this, folks? Why? Why isn't this where the focus is? If the idea is to depress the curve, why aren't we talking about things that we know work? Do we have hard science that this is going to actually be the... No, we don't. We don't know. And by the way, it's not the answer. If you're counting on a vaccine being the answer, what you're counting on is somebody making billions of dollars at your expense, and Granny's going to die anyway. Think about that, folks. We're going to build all these ventilators. You're going to put... someone goes on a vent, you're going to put $1 million in somebody's medical bill. Someone's going to pay that bill. If it's Medicare, it's going to be you. If it's private insurance, it's going to be you. If you don't have anything, it's going to be you personally, and you're going to lose your house and everything else. All right? And yet, 2/3 of the time, if you go on a vent, you're dead within a year. Those are the statistics. Wouldn't it be better if we could take a 0 off the rate of people that needed the vents? Wouldn't that be better than building a lot of vents? Better for who? Better for you, better for me, better for Granny, better for everybody in society, but not better for the medical system, not better for Donald Trump's friends, not better for all the friends in Congress, not better for all the friends of the governor, not better for all the friends of the state houses and legislatures and city managers and everybody else, all of whom are making a goddamn fortune. $1.05 in the economy, folks, goes into the medical scam. And instead of taking mitigating factors that we know about, instead of the government saying, as soon as we found out from Diamond Princess, and we suspected this even before then, we suspected this at Wuhan. All right, but even before that ship was quarantined. And then when it was confirmed, instead of going to the nonprofits, to the hospitals that operate as actual so-called nonprofits, and to the research facilities and universities in this country and saying to them, we want an antibody test. We want to be able to give somebody a test and know if they're immune. We want to know. And when you come up with this thing, we're going to manufacture it. There's going to be no patents. It goes to the public because this is something that is of importance to global public health. And at the same time, we're going to start using drugs that are well tolerated and used as prophylaxis against things like malaria. Look, nobody would take an anti-malarial as a prophylaxis unless it was quite well tolerated and had a very low risk of causing problems. A lower risk than you of getting malaria and having health problems or dying from malaria. So obviously this is a drug that can be safely used in virtually everybody. Not everyone. There are people who shouldn't take it. There's, like I said, there's a huge list of other drug interactions if you look up the data on this thing. But how about all the high-risk people that don't take one of those drugs or could take something else instead of that drug? Is the goal here really to flatten the curve? Is the goal here really to do those things? Is that the goal? Why don't we have anybody within the system today going there? Now, don't tell me it doesn't work because we don't know it doesn't work. Is there anything wrong with doing all of this in parallel? Is there? No, there's not, is there? Why in the hell wouldn't you right now? I mean, look, folks, this isn't just an American problem. When this started to go batshit in Italy, why the hell didn't Italy start handing out these antimalarial drugs to all the old people in Italy? Why aren't we handing them out to all the old people here, right now? Why isn't the skilled care facility, the so-called adult senior living place, that's 2.5 miles up the road from where I'm recording this, why aren't they dosing everybody who's willing to take it? Hey, listen, it is a choice, and I get it. I absolutely get it. There are going to be people who are going to say, I do not want to take that stuff. I think it's crap. It may be dangerous, blah, 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 blah. I get it. And I'm cool with that. If that's what you want to do, you want to say, well, I you know what? I just don't think that's worth the risks. Fine. But folks, if we can take a 0 off the fatality rate for people at high risk, all of a sudden, this disease is no longer a scare. It now is still a little worse than the seasonal flu. But we deal with the seasonal flu every day. We deal with it every year. It kills 15,000, 20,000 people a year in the United States. Well, if this bug kills 15,000 people a year, every year in the United States, that's sad. But it's not a public health emergency. If it kills 500,000 people, that's a different story. Now all of a sudden you're going to, oh, shit. All right? But what are we doing right now? We are literally throwing our economy into a severe recession, maybe a depression, over something that is avoidable to a large degree, at least in theory. We don't know, but we're not trying it. Why not? What's the downside? Folks, start asking these questions. And you know what? You're not gonna. You know why? Because you're too busy buying all the toilet paper and the chicken soup. You know, all you small business people, all you independent contractors, who, by the way, have no benefits, and you know, you don't get sick leave, you don't get any of this. But you know, I always loved this Screamfest from the independent contractors, the AB5 out in California. Everybody's yelling, yada, 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 yada. You know, everybody is yelling. Everybody says, "Oh my God, you can't take this away from us." How you feeling now? That's the thing about independent contractors. When there's a dislocation in the market, you get laid off first because they don't have to pay any benefits. Well, and people say, "Oh, look how much more money I'm making." No, you're not. And you know why? Because you didn't stash anything back as the imputed cost of benefits that you would otherwise get if you were an employee. You should have done it, but you didn't do it. The whole reason you wanted to be, the whole reason you wanted to be an independent contractor was to not have that come out of your paycheck. I know. I understand. Listen, look, when I was young, no obligations. I didn't have a house. All I had was an apartment. If things went to shit, I could pack up everything in my car. It would all fit. All right. Yeah, it was tight, but it would fit. All the stuff I cared about anyway. The hell with the shitty $50 furniture. All right. I could get everything else into a car or at most a U-Haul that I could pull behind the car, and I could go anywhere in the United States. So and by the way, this happened to me a couple of times when I was younger too. I was doing contract work, making decent money. All of a sudden, bang, gone. Well, that's the way it happens. That's what being a contractor is about. MCS, the original version of it, was a two-person company. Okay, it was a company, but it was a two-person operation. We had a contract that was we provided computers and support services, PCs and support services, to a company that does asbestos abatement in the Chicago area. That was the thing. They were very successful at it. Great firm, great people. I loved them. And everything was wonderful and beautiful and all of this. And then, out of the middle of nowhere, Waste Management came in and bought them. Just bought them up, lock, stock, and barrel. Well, Waste Management, of course, had its own IT department. So all of a sudden, they didn't need us. They didn't need our computer supplies, and they didn't need our service either. And so we had a huge percentage of our business just evaporate. Poof, gone like a fart in a church. And not too long after that, Mike and I sat down and we said, well, this is, can we maybe pick this up? Maybe. I don't know. But should we pick this up? Probably not. And he went and got a job. I went and got a job, and we shut the company down. I kept the name. By the way, that's why it was MCS Net, Macro Computer Solutions. I kept the name. That was one of the things that got divvied up during it. Of course, at that time, it had no value, but then I reused it when I started the internet company. And that's where the name came from. But, so if you're an independent contractor, this is part of the game. And if you do not, if this isn't part of what you're willing to deal with, then shut the fuck up. I mean, for real. But look, folks, when it comes to public health, I am really tired about the situation right now with our so-called authorities that are not willing to take steps that we have evidence from other places. We're talking about democratic governments. We're not talking about China making statements that may not be true. They may, as far as I know, they might try to kill us. Remember, they didn't let our CDC in for quite a long time, right? They wouldn't let our people come in there and look at this thing. But the South Koreans are a different story, all right? And we have that. We have that information. We have the information off Diamond Princess. And what the South Korean story says is that we have paths of mitigation available, and those people that are high risk ought to be using it, and we should not be screwing everybody else who does not have a significantly elevated risk of really bad things happening. And if the bottom line is that we're trying to prevent the healthcare system from being overloaded, then tamping down the place where the 100 times greater risk is going to come from of you having a bad outcome, ending up in the hospital on a ventilator, if you can take a 0 off the attack rate where that leads to serious outcomes for that group of people, the problem goes away. And we're not even attempting it. You want to know who ought to be? Yeah. Well, you're worried about the sky falling and the stock market crashing, everything else. You need to think about, why are people not going there? Because they're not. Have fun, folks. There's more to this story. I hate when I discover things like this, and then and if I can see it, and I'm not an MD, I'm not the smartest guy in the room, well, you bet those guys up there in D.C. know about it. And they're not doing it, and they're not doing it for a reason. I'm your ticker guy. And that's how it is.